10 gemstones that turned millionaires into debtors. They weren't amateurs. They weren't tricked by street vendors or fooled by fake certificates. These were seasoned investors, private collectors, and wealth managers. The kind of people who don't take financial risks without due diligence. Yet one by one, they watch their gemstone holdings disappear in value, removed from auction listings, denied insurance, or rendered unsellable. Not because the stones were synthetic, not because they were broken, but because what they bought wasn't what the market would recognize when it mattered most. Over the past decade, the gemstone world shifted. Technology changed how stones were treated, priced, and sold. At the same time, prestige auctions created headlines that shaped entire markets, even for rocks that didn't deserve the comparison. Some investors followed origin stories they couldn't verify. Some paid six figures for color that wouldn't pass modern lab protocols. Some trusted in legacy names that no longer guaranteed liquidity. And some believed that beauty would be enough. This is not a list of fakes. This is a timeline of real stones, bought for real money, that left their owners with nothing. The first one, a ruby that looked flawless, until the light passed through something it was never supposed to contain. Ranked 10th, treated Burmese ruby, the value that cracked from within. A ruby weighing just over 6 carats is placed on the examination tray at a gem lab in Bangkok. It looks pristine, vivid pigeon blood red, eye clean, no visible surface fractures, no apparent flaws. But under ultraviolet light and magnification, something emerges. A network of fine fissures runs through the stone, each one filled with a material slightly duller than the ruby itself. That substance is lead glass, used to enhance clarity, but unstable, impermanent, and challenging to detect without professional tools. From 2004 through the early 2010s, rubies treated this way, especially from Myanmar, flooded the international market. They weren't fake. They were genuine rubies, but ones that had been structurally altered, and that alteration cut their resale value by up to 90%. The financial fallout didn't come from the treatment itself. It came from how these stones were sold. Dozens of rubies passed through private channels, Bangkok, Dubai, Geneva, marketed as natural or sold with minimal documentation. The buyers were not hobbyists. They were seasoned collectors, high-net-worth individuals, and institutional investors. One well-documented case involved an 8.21-carat Burmese ruby sold at a Geneva sale for nearly $600,000. Months later, it was submitted to a New York gem lab for insurance evaluation. The report confirmed heavy lead glass filling. The insurer declined coverage. The seller couldn't be reached, and the stone's open market resale value dropped to under $4,000, if anyone was willing to take it at all. The damage wasn't isolated. Today, even untreated Burmese rubies are subject to scrutiny if they show natural surface fissures. Auction houses have since changed their disclosure protocols, but for many collectors, the financial damage was already done. What was once seen as one of the most stable physical assets in the gem world became a risk few were prepared for. Treated Burmese rubies didn't bankrupt investors through fraud or theft. They did it by exploiting overconfidence, the belief that some assets, by reputation alone, were too trusted to fail, and that belief cost them dearly. Ranked 9th, blue obsidian, the gem that was never real. There was no mine, no documented source, no volcanic deposit tied to any GPS coordinate. But starting in the early 2000s, blue obsidian began appearing at gem fairs in Tucson, Munich, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. Not the opaque black-green obsidian recognized in geology. This was vivid, translucent blue. It caught light like fine glass. Dealers described it as volcanic in origin. Some said it came from Peru, while others said it came from Armenia or Mexico. No lab could verify it, but no buyer seemed to care. Pieces were mounted in gold, paired with white diamonds, and sold in galleries that catered to spiritually inclined collectors and wealth managers alike. Brochures claimed the stone was forged in ancient eruptions, charged with energy from the Earth's core. One American collector paid $28,000 for a set of 12 matched blue obsidian meditation cabochons, each labeled with origin tags and paired with interpretive meaning, Clarity, healing, vision. He only discovered the truth when he tried to insure them through a high-value collectibles policy. The lab report came back with a single line: man-made glass. No evidence of natural volcanic formation. The insurance was denied. It wasn't an isolated case. Over the next 5 years, multiple labs, including the GIA and the Deutsche Gemologische Gesellschaft, began releasing position papers. No known volcanic process could produce transparent blue obsidian. No Peruvian mine had ever yielded it. The market reacted slowly. Some dealers pivoted, describing the stones as spiritually significant rather than geological. But for those who had already spent tens of thousands, that rebranding came too late. The issue wasn't just the financial loss, though many pieces were valued at five-figure sums based on false scarcity. The deeper problem was how these stones infiltrated a niche of the gem world where certification wasn't expected. In holistic markets, metaphysical catalogs, and private sale environments, buyers trusted description over provenance. No fakes were detected because no authenticity was ever required. By 2017, several mid-range auction houses had pulled blue obsidian lots from upcoming sales. The stones were quietly returned unsold. A few lawsuits surfaced, primarily in civil court, where claimants argued that misrepresentation had voided their purchases. But legal recourse was limited. There was no central seller, no master fraud, just a system that allowed unverified material to circulate under the aesthetic of rarity. Today, blue obsidian has no recognized value on the global gem market. Most dealers won't touch it. Labs won't issue reports. And former buyers are left with polished glass no insurer will recognize, no collector will acquire, and no marketplace will absorb. What was once seen as exotic and elevated is now omitted from serious collections. In the end, no one lied on paper. The stone story was told through suggestion, lighting, and presentation, not geology. And that made the illusion even harder to disprove, until the market stopped believing altogether. Ranked 8th, glass-filled sapphire, when clarity cost $100,000. The buyer had done everything right. The sapphire was certified, vividly colored, and professionally mounted in an 18-karat gold pendant. Purchased through a dealer in Geneva, it came with a retail invoice exceeding $36,000. What it didn't come with was a disclosure that the stone had been filled with lead glass. The flaw wasn't visible. The treatment had worked. The stone appeared cleaner, more brilliant than most natural sapphires of similar size. But just 2 years later, when the piece was sent for routine maintenance and cleaning, the sapphire fractured under ultrasonic vibration. Not from pressure, but from within. Between 2007 and 2014, an estimated 500,000 carats of glass-filled sapphires circulated through the global market. The stones were real corundum, often pale or included, but treated with a high-temperature process that forced lead glass into surface-reaching fractures. The result, better color, better clarity, at least temporarily. But structurally, the stones were unstable. Collectors and buyers were rarely told. Some dealers didn't know, others didn't ask. One U.S.-based investor, who had purchased several investment-grade sapphires during a visit to Bangkok in 2012, later discovered that none of the stones would pass a GIA full report. The treatment wasn't considered minor. The report didn't call them sapphires at all. It labeled them composite material. No resale, no appraisal, no payout. The portfolio value fell from $140,000 to under $5,000 overnight. This wasn't a case of fraud in appearance. The stones were beautiful. They tested as corundum. But under heat, under steam, under the slightest pressure, they fractured, because the internal structure was never whole. Some high-end retailers have since withdrawn all stones with uncertain treatment histories. Major labs began issuing updated report categories for composite corundum. But for many buyers, the damage was irreversible. Their sapphires were no longer gemstones. They were failed experiments. The illusion was technical. These stones didn't look like scams. They looked flawless. But flawlessness, in these cases, wasn't natural, and it wasn't durable. For investors who trusted the surface, the cracks only showed up after the money was gone. Ranked 7th, red Andesine Feldspar, the gem that collapsed upon identification. They arrived without history, but with stunning color. Dealers laid them out at gem shows in Bangkok and Tucson by the hundreds. Red Andesine Feldspar with the glow of fire opal and the clarity of fine spinel. It was positioned as newly discovered, rare, and possibly Tibetan. In private viewings, stones were paired with storylines, high-altitude deposits, monks guarding the source, minimal mining access. Papers were absent, but excitement was not. Within 5 years, red andesine moved from unknown to desirable, with some pieces selling for over $20,000. Collectors from Tokyo to Los Angeles bought in, drawn to a gem with no baggage and no questions. But the questions came. As gem labs received more specimens, inconsistencies emerged. Chemical signatures didn't match those of any known Tibetan mineral belt. The color distribution suggested surface modification. By 2008, independent studies confirmed what the lab suspected. These stones had been exposed to high-temperature diffusion with copper, a treatment known to enhance feldspar color artificially. They weren't fakes, but they weren't what they were sold as either. The Tibetan origin collapsed. No, mine was never proven. And stones once praised as natural red feldspar were now labeled diffused andesine. Collectors responded in waves. Some filed legal action, but most tried to resell. The secondary market, once optimistic, vanished. Auction houses pulled listings. Dealers refused to buy back inventory. Stones purchased at $8,000 could no longer find buyers at $400. Insurance coverage was denied across the board. And portfolios built around red andesine, some comprising dozens of stones, became non-recoverable losses. This wasn't a collapse caused by fashion or overproduction. It was a collapse of provenance. The gem's identity was its price. Once the origin vanished, so did the value. And for those who bought early, there was no compensation. Only the realization that they had paid for a geography that never existed. Ranked 6th, treated Colombian emeralds. The premium that dissolved in oil. It was listed at $187,000. Colombian origin, vivid green, set in platinum, framed by 2 tapered baguette diamonds. The dealer called it museum grade. The buyer didn't ask about treatments. He didn't request a second lab report. The certificate, issued by a mid-tier European lab, confirmed Colombian source, but offered no grading on clarity enhancement. The assumption was simple. Colombian emeralds hold value, especially those purchased through trusted boutiques. But assumptions don't hold up in liquid markets. 2 years later, the stone was submitted to a significant U.S. gemological lab for insurance valuation. The results came back with language the collector hadn't seen before. Significant artificial filler, polymer-based. The emerald wasn't just oiled, it had been filled. Modern synthetic polymers had been introduced into the stone under pressure, sealing internal fractures and enhancing clarity well beyond what the naked eye could detect. Technically speaking, the color was natural, but the structure? Altered. The resale value plummeted. A stone purchased for nearly $200,000 now struggles to appraise above $25,000. The insurance company refused to write a policy for the original amount, and the boutique declined to take the piece back. What happened wasn't illegal, but it was common. From 2005 to 2015, a wave of high-value Colombian emeralds made its way through private dealer circuits, many of them treated with polymer-based fillers rather than traditional cedar oil. The issue wasn't the treatment itself, it was the absence of disclosure or the buyer's lack of experience to recognize that treatment level changes everything. In emeralds, origin alone doesn't define value. Color isn't enough. Clarity enhancement, especially beyond minor, is the invisible fault line where 6-figure assets quietly collapse. One portfolio manager in New York, tasked with liquidating a late client's estate, sent 11 emeralds to AGL for resale grading. 9 came back with significant treatment. 2 were so heavily altered that labs refused to assign an origin at all. The collection had been purchased over 10 years through reputable sources, totaling over $1.3 million. What was the best offer they received from a wholesale buyer? $112,000, contingent on no further disclosure. These emeralds still looked beautiful. Their settings were luxurious. Their color, rich, deep, unmistakably Colombian, hadn't changed. But their market had. Buyers today demand transparency, third-party lab reports, and treatment declarations. The emeralds purchased during that earlier window, no matter how visually compelling, now exist outside the frameworks of auction, insurance, and high-tier resale. Some are passed down as heirlooms. Others remain sealed in vaults, unsellable. The damage was quiet. No gem cracked, no fraud was shouted across headlines. But the wealth behind these stones dissolved just as thoroughly as the fillers within them. Not because the rocks were fake, but because the value they represented relied on a definition that no longer applied. Ranked fifth, Padparadscha Sapphire. The name that cost too much. The word itself carried weight. Padparadscha, named after the lotus blossom, marketed as the rarest sapphire variety, described as the perfect balance between pink and orange, but without defined limits. In practice, the category was fluid until labs began drawing lines. One collector in Tokyo purchased a 4.71 carat sapphire in 2009 through a dealer in Geneva. The stone had exceptional color, a soft apricot hue under daylight, glowing warmer under candlelight. It was sold as Padparadscha, priced accordingly, $148,000. The invoice cited Sri Lankan origin. The certification? A brief lab note confirming natural sapphire, but no declaration on classification. Years passed before the buyer submitted the stone to a central gemological lab, intending to reinsure the collection. The report returned with a correction. Orangish pink sapphire, not Padparadscha. The distinction was clear, not color alone, but color range, hue distribution, and tonal balance, all measured against controlled lab standards. What had once been the centerpiece of an elite portfolio was now downgraded to a category carrying less than one-third of the original value. The resale failed. Two auction houses declined the listing. One suggested reclassifying it as pink sapphire, exceptional tone, but warned that estimates would not exceed $40,000. The owner declined. Another investor in Dubai had a similar experience. His 3.18 carat stone, purchased through a boutique with verbal assurances only, was appraised at just 12% of the purchase price after failing to meet the Padparadscha classification in a lab review. This wasn't a question of damage or fraud. The stones were natural. They were untreated. But the market for Padparadscha operates on one critical assumption: third-party recognition of the name. Without that, the price collapses. The stone doesn't change, but the context does. Over the last decade, gemological institutions have tightened definitions. GRS, SSEF, and GIA each use slightly different criteria, but the commercial consensus is unified. Without a formal lab designation, Padparadscha cannot be used. And for many who purchased early, trusting sales channels, reputations, or their own eyes, the consequences arrived slowly, then all at once. These were not impulsive buyers. They were seasoned collectors, some with long-standing relationships in Geneva, Tokyo, and Hong Kong. They paid for beauty, and they got it. But beauty without classification in this case had no bankable value. In the end, they didn't lose money because the sapphire was fake. They lost it because the market redefined what it was allowed to be. Ranked fourth, synthetic Alexandrite. The shift that left buyers with nothing, the lab result came back in less than 3 days. Synthetic, Czochralski grown. The owner asked for a second opinion. Same result. The stone, a 5.9 carat Alexandrite with brilliant color change and no visible inclusions, had been the centerpiece of his collection for nearly a decade. Purchased for €64,000 from a boutique dealer in Monaco, the sale came with only a store-issued appraisal and a verbal assurance that the piece was natural. At the time, he saw no need to verify. The color shift was perfect. The dealer was well known. The paperwork looked official. It wasn't. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, synthetic alexandrites were manufactured in large quantities, not for deception, but for availability. Produced using high-temperature methods that mimic natural growth, these stones share the same optical characteristics as their natural counterparts. The color shift, the birefringence, the fluorescence, nearly identical. For non-experts, even jewelers, distinguishing between the two without advanced lab tools is almost impossible. The problem began when these synthetics entered private collections and boutique sales without disclosure. Sold at natural stone prices, they sat in vaults, displays, and estate inventories, until a need for resale, insurance, or liquidation triggered lab testing. That's when the category collapsed. Natural alexandrite from Russia or Brazil can reach prices over $15,000 per carat. Synthetic alexandrite, regardless of appearance, has no recognized resale market at the collector level. In Paris, a family trust attempted to auction 4 heirloom alexandrites acquired between 1985 and 1999. All were rejected after SSEF and GIA confirmed a synthetic origin. The trust had no legal recourse. The pieces weren't fakes. They were sold without clarity, at a time when documentation was optional and natural was assumed unless proven otherwise. Even today, some of these stones remain insured at outdated valuations, pending reappraisal. Others sit in safe deposit boxes held by owners unwilling to face the confirmation. A few have been reset as fashion jewelry, stripped of status, repurposed as ornaments. The damage didn't come from flaws in the stone. It came from perfect execution in the wrong category. A synthetic alexandrite is a marvel of modern mineralogy, but it's not an asset. And for buyers who believed otherwise, the moment of realization came not when the stone failed, but when it was finally seen for what it truly was. Ranked third, color-treated diamonds. The fancy colors that erased millions. The diamond was a 2.31 carat fancy vivid pink, cushion cut, excellent polish, internally flawless. Sold through a private jeweler in Beverly Hills, accompanied by a laminated certificate from a mid-tier European gem lab. The client, a private equity executive, paid $385,000. The stone was set in a platinum engagement ring, delivered in a branded box, sealed with embossed documents. But no GIA report. 4 years later, during divorce proceedings, the stone was submitted for resale appraisal. The lab result read, HPHT treated diamond, origin of color not natural. The resale collapsed instantly. An identical, untreated pink diamond, verified by GIA, would command well over $500,000 at auction. The treated stone, estimated between $18,000 and $25,000, just 5% of the original purchase price. Across the 2010s, dozens of colored diamonds were sold into private portfolios without full origin disclosure. Some were treated with high-pressure, high-temperature methods to enhance brown stones into vibrant yellow, green, or pink. Others were grown entirely in labs through CVD, indistinguishable to the naked eye. The rocks were real diamonds, yes, but without a verifiable natural color origin, their value didn't scale with appearance. It collapsed under scrutiny. One London-based collector learned this too late. Her estate included 3 colored diamonds totaling 6.2 carats, acquired from boutique dealers in Geneva and Singapore. Initial valuation, $1.2 million. After SSEF testing confirmed 2 had undergone HPHT color modification and 1 was CVD grown, the final marketable value came down to $84,000. Resale through any major auction was no longer viable. Insurance claims were denied. This collapse didn't stem from damage or fraud. It came from the absence of something. Origin. In the colored diamond market, color alone is not a value driver. It's the combination of color, clarity, and most critically, confirmation that the color is natural. That confirmation must come from the right lab, using the proper protocols, under the right level of transparency. Anything less, and the diamond becomes a visual illusion without financial gravity. These weren't scams. They were stones sold into silence. And for the buyers, often wealthy, informed, and surrounded by the illusion of certainty, What failed wasn't the gem, but the assumption that beauty meant provenance. Ranked second, Tanzanite Bubble, 2000 to 2010, when hype replaced hard assets. At its peak, Tanzanite was marketed as rarer than diamond, more contemporary than sapphire, and accessible enough for the modern collector. The story was compelling. One location on Earth, discovered only in 1967, introduced to the world by Tiffany and Company, and hailed as the first gemstone of the 21st century. Brochures claimed a limited supply. Television networks featured it in prime time. Auctioneers used the phrase single-source scarcity in catalog descriptions. For many high-net-worth buyers, it seemed like the perfect gemstone investment, a blue-chip asset still in its early phase. From 2000 to 2010, prices for top-quality tanzanite surged. Stones over 20 carats with intense violet-blue saturation routinely fetched six figures. Jewelry houses positioned them beside emeralds and rubies. Private buyers purchased stones by the parcel, in vaults, not in settings, betting on the rise of public demand. One investor in Singapore purchased a 36.4-carat match pair for $226,000, expecting to hold them long-term as generational assets. But as the decade ended, the narrative began to slip. Tiffany relinquished its exclusivity. Mining expanded in Marilani. Saturation increased. Supply outpaced prestige. Public taste shifted back to traditional gems. And when those early investors looked to resell, the market was no longer there. The same 36.4-carat pair, submitted for auction in Geneva in 2015, was passed with a high estimate of just $28,000. No bids, no sale. This wasn't a scam. The stones were genuine. The origin was verified. But the valuation had never been based on geology. It was based on a story. And when the story no longer held, the prices no longer followed. Resale offers for tanzanite across private channels today hover around 10 to 15% of peak era valuations. Major auction houses accept only rare cuts or exceptional provenance. The rest, once stored in temperature-controlled vaults, insured as part of estate assets, are now considered decorative stones with no serious liquidity. For the collectors and investors who bought during the surge, the collapse wasn't visible at first. The stones didn't crack. The colors didn't fade. But the market moved on. And what was once hailed as the heir to sapphire became a reminder that narrative-driven assets fade faster than the minerals they're built on. In first place, Mozambique Ruby, the auction record that broke an entire market. In 2015, a Mozambique Ruby set a new record at Sotheby's Geneva, 25.59 carats, pigeon's blood red, untreated, sold for $30.3 million. It marked a turning point. For the first time, a ruby rivaled diamond prices in a public sale. And it wasn't from Burma. Investors took note. Overnight, Mozambique rubies shifted from promising to institutional. Private collectors, fund-backed buyers, and luxury wholesalers poured into the supply chain. Demand spiked, so did prices. From 2015 to 2020, parcels of Mozambique rubies, untreated or lightly treated, began trading at 5 to 10 times pre-auction prices. Gem fairs from Bangkok to New York rebranded ruby sections with Mozambique origin tags. Mines expanded rapidly. Intermediaries bought entire lots for speculative holding. Stones under 5 carats were marketed as investment class. Dozens of portfolios were built not for jewelry, but for price appreciation alone. But the spike wasn't built on rarity. It was built on visibility. Unlike Burmese rubies, limited by politics and sanctions, Mozambique production surged. Stones continued entering the market, quietly but relentlessly. Meanwhile, resale opportunities remained narrow. Auction records set by a handful of exceptional stones were cited as benchmarks, even for goods that weren't comparable in size, clarity, or certification. By 2021, early buyers began liquidating. Prices faltered. Stones purchased at $12,000 per carat failed to sell at $4,000. Wholesalers who stocked inventory for future markups saw their books devalue by 60 to 80%. One Hong Kong collector, who had acquired a suite of matched rubies at $2.1 million across 2016 to 2019, received a resale offer of $440,000 in 2023, contingent on no further testing or publicity. This wasn't fraud. The rubies were genuine. The color was natural. The reports were clean. What collapsed was the assumption that price follows prestige. That which breaks records will raise all ships. But auctions are anomalies, not averages. And in gem markets, visibility drives volatility, especially when extraction continues long after marketing peaks. Mozambique rubies are still beautiful, still respected, but they are no longer speculative grade. Dealers now warn clients that high-quality rubies must be held for passion, not profit. And for many investors who bought in after 2015, that message came too late. None of the stones was fake. Every one of them was real, geologically, chemically, even visually. But in the world of high-value assets, reality isn't the same as recognition. A ruby with hidden glass, a sapphire that cracked in ultrasonic cleaning, an emerald whose value vanished with a single lab report, or a diamond that sparkled with color no buyer would touch. Each gemstone in this story held a price once, but when its origin, its treatment, or its market positioning failed, that price didn't hold. And for investors who paid at the peak, the lesson wasn't about geology, it was about timing, disclosure, verification, and trust placed not in facts, but in the idea that rarity always equals value. In truth, it doesn't, because the difference between a luxury and an asset, this is what happens when you try to sell.